So there's a common trope in the genre known as film noir of Venetian blinds. Seriously, Venetian blinds are all over the place, and that's because the partial shadow is symbolic of the fact that all these different people have secrets and whatnot that are to be revealed later in the film. Now, that analogy doesn't have anything to do with today's topic. In fact, a better, more apt analogy of film noir to today's topic is this other common trope, which is the small town, attractive girl getting swallowed up by the big city. And occasionally, when I think of Lauren Southern, I think of this particular film trope, because here you have somebody that is idealistic, that actually believed in the things that she was preaching, which is oftentimes very rare on the internet.com, who try to live up to those values only to get swallowed up and spit out, as explained in this article from an outlet that I never heard of that is called Unheard. Get it? Comedy. And that's what I want to talk about today, because there is a lot of pushing of this trad wife influencer kind of lifestyle to people in the conservative media, and honestly, a lot of it is nonsensical, and this article gives you the perspective of somebody who tried to live up to what is being portrayed in those listicles, again, as described by her, not by me, and I think it's interesting for us to go through because we need to not oversimplify relationships, what makes them work, and whatnot, because it has disastrous results, as it did for Lauren Southern. Now, before we get into this, I want to thank everybody who signed up over on actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay?
Your support is greatly appreciated. So full disclosure, right off the top, I just want to say that I actually like Lauren Southern.
Simp.
Okay.
Simp.
Come on, let it all out.
Stop simping.
I got it. And this is despite the fact that I have many reasons to dislike her. First and foremost, Canadian. Ew, disgusting. Have you seen the way that she says words like sorry? Absolutely horrific and shameful. On top of that, I cannot ignore that she is trying to become Rogue from X-Men. Everybody can see it, Lauren. I don't know why you're trying to hide this. But in all seriousness, this is despite the fact that I didn't think that I would like her when I met her, because when you get famous that young, usually that makes you kind of like a horrible, self-centered person. But after meeting her in person, she's probably the person that I was most surprised about. She actually cares about other people and isn't self-centered, and honestly has been humbled through her experiences rather than thinks of herself as some kind of untouchable star. And again, this is despite the fact that she was essentially a rock star who kind of instantly became famous in conservative media, which people who touch a little bit of fame that young tend to be absolutely horrible. So credit where credit is due there. Secondly, I think one of the reasons why not just me but other people tend to like her is because she actually tries to live up to the values that she preaches, and that's exactly how she ended up in the situation that she was in, according to this Unheard article, because I'm sure some of you guys are aware, Lauren very famously left the content space at the height of her popularity in order to get married and live the trad life, just as is outlined by the trad life influencers, and guess what? It completely backfired and was a devastating situation for her that essentially she had to escape after kind of being trapped in Australia due to political reasons and due to COVID. And I think it's actually important for us to actually examine people who tried to live up to these values rather than people who preach these values and don't actually have any connection to them in the real world at all whatsoever. This is one of those internet brain versus reality situations, and both the internet brain party and the reality party are in one person, Lauren. First of all, this article is written by a woman called Mary Harrington, who is a former feminist that became more reasonable, writing about Lauren, who is this super trad woman influencer who also ended up becoming more reasonable. Now, as this article outlines, Lauren left media at age 22, the height of her popularity, in order to actually live up to the social conservative template of a wife and mother, or a trad wife, as is named in this particular article. Now, this was in 2019, and on top of all of that, she ended up moving to Australia to be with her husband, where she ended up giving up her political career to embrace the nurturing, feminine domestic role, promoted by the right-wing traditionalists, and again, this is known as the trad wife. But now that Lauren has left the idealized, picturesque trad lifestyle because it wasn't all that it was cracked up to be, she's now speaking out against it, and in fact has actually formed a group with other people that are in or recently got out of so-called trad wife situations where they support each other and they try to move forward. And one of the things that I want to take note of in this portion of the article is the fact that Lauren says that she's speaking out not as a betrayal of her side or anything like that, but knowing that she's going to be attacked because she's trying to share a realistic perspective on this rather than focus on internet brain, so that women that are in a similar position to her don't go down the same path. Because remember, she promoted this. This was something that she pushed for and actually tried to engage in. And to be clear, Lauren is obviously being attacked. In fact, I completely missed this article up until very recently because when I saw the attacks being leveled against her, I assumed it was based on the previous thing that people were attacking her for, and I didn't actually look into it. But I am glad that I ultimately ended up finding this because there are very important lessons from this story. However, I know people want me to give the caveat that this is her side of the story. We don't have the other side of the story. So to be fair, even though Lauren has offered a bunch of different people some private ways of confirming different aspects of her story in the past, this is her version of the story, and I'm just going to leave it at that. But I want to examine it because remember, a marriage involves two parties, and if we want marriage to work and be more successful, we should examine the experiences of two parties. We shouldn't just blame the women for everything, which is the modern trend right now, the unthinking trend. We should actually understand that what you need in order for a marriage to function is something that I like to call complementary interlocking gender roles. Now, this trad life WhatsApp group that Lauren is a part of and works with people on is often referred to as an underground railroad for women in the conservative movement, some who are prominent media figures, and that's because there are a lot of influencers that are not in good relationships who are still portraying a happy marriage publicly and bashing people for not being married despite the fact that they're in these terrible relationships. And she hopes that she can speak out and she can reassure all of these women who are thinking in their heads, I'm uniquely terrible and I'm uniquely making a mistake, that no, sometimes things are more generally amiss. Now look, without getting into anybody's business or anything like that, this is something that you commonly hear related to certain married couples in the conservative media space. They're in crap situations, they're being mistreated, but for some reason, they feel the need to uphold it publicly so that you guys out there in the audience can feel like they are an inspiration style couple. But the problem with that is it's not real. And secondly, marriage is not supposed to be a show for other people. It's supposed to be a partnership between two people, between husband and wife, where you're working together to form a common goal, raise a family, do all that good and swell stuff. Now, I'm somebody who is in a long-term relationship. I've known my fiance for 10 years. I am to be married this year. I already know some people out there in the comments are going to say, Sean, don't get married or anything like that. But one of the best parts about my relationship is that it's private. We don't have to put on a show for other people. We don't have to represent ourselves out into the public in the way that many of these people ultimately end up having to do. And honestly, it is quite sad, and it's very sad to see in person. So one of the first times that I met Lauren, she was still in that phase where she wasn't telling people that she actually had split with her husband. She described this in her long video as a denial phase. And one of my friends who worked in intelligence, when Lauren said that her husband was having trouble getting to Canada, because that's the story that she was going with, ultimately ended up knowing a lot about that particular field and essentially gave her all these different ways for this person to come to America so that they could have their happy family. And when I said America, I actually meant Canada because, again, Canadian, disgusting, ew, I don't like it. Now, this is actually when I realized that she was not together with her husband, and I remember breaking up this conversation by making a joke about my friend who was in the military, who was talking about working in intelligence, committing a war crime, which he didn't appreciate at the time. But look at where we are now, Clinton. Look at what I have revealed to you about my intentions way back when. Now that you know that even though you work intelligence, I got the 10,000 IQ and I could see things that other people can't see. But anyway, enough about me. Let's actually get into this situation, because what Lauren said that she based her ideal view of marriage on, unfortunately, wasn't the successful marriage that she often talked about that her parents had. It was listicles, BuzzFeed-style articles in list form, but for the right wing. The article describes Lauren and her sister as spending their adolescence in the internet hinterlands where wild ideas flourish, free of grounding in material reality and practical experience. Here, one's complex theories are swiftly distilled into bare essentials for maximum viral reach. As Southern put it, quote, "Follow the listicle and you'll be fine," end quote. And by the time she met her husband, she had been condensing conservative values into listicle form as a media influencer for some years, to the point where it seemed possible to realize this framework in real life. So when marriage beckoned at age 22, she tells WRYLY, "I thought I won the lottery." They were married within 4 months and she was quickly pregnant. Now listen, I'm just gonna say this as somebody who's known the fiance for 10 years and who has actually engaged 2 years before the wedding is set to take place. 4 months is not a long period of time. I'm not saying anything, I'm not trying to throw shade, but if I had a time machine, I would go back in time and probably figure out what killed the dinosaurs, but probably 157th on my list, maybe 10,959th on my list. I might say, hey, Lauren, for 4 months is a little soon at age 22. Now, one of the things that troubled me is the fact that she trained herself essentially through this indoctrination program of conservative media and conservative values being distilled into listicles, and essentially accepted all kinds of inappropriate behavior. Quote, "If I ever disagreed with him in any capacity, he'd just disappear for days at a time. I remember there were nights where he called me worthless and pathetic, then got in his car to leave." But unfortunately, all this oversimplified anti-feminism refused to let her see those bad signs. Quote, "I had the delusional view of relationships that only women could be the ones that make or break them, and men could do no wrong. So she didn't spot the red flags, even as they grew more extreme." Quote, "He'd lock me out of the house. I remember having to knock on a neighbor's door on rainy nights because he'd get upset, drive off without unlocking the house. It was very strange to go from being this public figure on stage with people clapping to the girl crying, knocking on someone else's door with no home to go into, being abandoned with a baby," end quote. Now look, to be clear, I don't want to throw shade at everybody in conservative media that is married. There is in fact a married couple that I really appreciate. They seem to be doing it right. I'm not going to name them right here, so you could speculate that maybe it's your favorite married couple, but in reality, you gotta understand that this is not acceptable behavior. First and foremost, I'm of the belief that you don't call your spouse, your significant other, your girlfriend, or whatever, any names at all whatsoever. In fact, one of the things my fiance finds so frustrating about me is that whenever we get into an argument, I will argue the point of the argument repeatedly and not get bogged down in any of this other stuff. And the reason why I don't do that is because I am of the belief, because it's 100% true, that any name that you call somebody, anything you say in an argument that's about the person being a horrible, terrible person, is something that they'll remember, something that they'll stick with. And over time, you're going to be arguing about all the different things that you argued about in the past, all the different slights that you gave to them during those arguments, and you can never move forward. Now, this of course doesn't mean that you should be a pushover. It means you should argue the point, the thing that you're arguing about, in order to find a resolution, and not call your lady a bitch or slut or whore or worthless or any of these names. And if you're in a relationship like that as a woman, you shouldn't put up with it. You should get out of the relationship. It's not acceptable behavior in my mind. But again, that's just me. I'm not the red pill influencer that is not in a stable relationship that sleeps with escorts all the time. So why would you even take my opinion on what you should do in relationships? Now, he also insisted that she should publicly quit work, and we heard this story before, that basically he had a high-level government security clearance, and her being a right-wing provocateur who had faced deplatforming, state investigations, and was even banned from entering the UK, also ended up impacting him in terms of his career. And by the way, this is something that Lauren has acknowledged. And when they moved back to Australia, they did so that he can go back to his old work. Now look, on its surface, there's absolutely nothing wrong with somebody leaving their career to be the more at-home person, moving with your spouse in order for them to pursue a better job. This is something that successful marriages do all the time. However, essentially, Lauren, a couple of days after her baby was born, and you can look at this in the article, again, according to her, was told either you move with me back to Australia or I'm going to leave you. And as somebody who is dedicated to the idea of marriage, the idea of being divorced was something that she found to be an unacceptable option. And again, here's another bit of advice for people out there in the audience. If you find yourself in a situation where you're doing something under the threat of divorce, and that also requires you separating yourself from your family, from your support system, and also requires you to get cut off financially from your own sources of income, that is a bad sign. Of course, caveat, it's just her side of the story. We haven't heard the other side of the story. I understand that. But in general, this is a good rule to follow. And obviously, this is something that Lauren would tell people to follow going forward based on her past experience. And honestly, this is probably something that if she heard another couple do this, because it's always easier from an outside perspective to see the problems in other people's relationships, she would probably have told them at the time not to get into that situation. Now, Lauren says that she was convinced and she believed truly that she had a certain role in the relationship, and it was to be the more submissive one that supports her husband's dreams. She says that she was told daily that she was worthless, pathetic, and dead weight. Then, thousands of miles from friends or family, she reports becoming the closest thing to a modern-day Western slave. With no income of her own, she had to do everything: the lawns, the house, the cooking, baby care, his university homework, and I didn't know anyone. I didn't have any support. There was no help changing diapers. There was no help waking up in the night with the baby. I'd still have to get up and make breakfast before he went to work. I'd be shaking and nervous for fear that I'm going to get yelled at. Then he'd berate her for spending all her time on tasks that aren't earning money. I was told daily that I was worthless, pathetic, dead weight. All you do is sit around and take care of the baby and do chores. When COVID shut down all real-world public life, her situation became hell on earth. It was, she said, the only time in my life where I idealized dying. Honestly, it makes me sad to read this article, and this would be true whether I knew Lauren, liked her, disliked her, or whatever, because the fact of the matter is, having a traditional role in the household is perfectly fine, but you should be appreciated in that role. And as so-called conservative men, we should understand that if a woman is going to take that role, that is something we should value her for, not degrade her for. It's kind of the most insane thing you could imagine, where you convince somebody to get rid of their job because it's affecting your career. You say that they should stay at home and do all the chores and take care of the mommy stuff, the baby stuff, and then attack them for not earning any money. And by the way, this is something that we've seen more than a few times in public divorces related to people in conservative media. Now look, I've said it before and I'll say it again, the lady that I'm getting married to by the end of this year is in law school. She's probably going to work as a lawyer, but if we start a family and she decides at some point in time that she wants to leave the workforce and do the stay-at-home things, I want to be in a position where I could support her in doing that. The idea that I would somehow insist on her leaving her job and then berate her for not earning any money is incredibly foreign and asinine to me. In fact, a lot of you guys out there in the audience will criticize me for not wanting to move out of New York City, and believe me, there are plenty of times where I do want to move out of New York City, but there are more important things than tax rates to me. And the fact of the matter is, I have family here, the fiance has family here, and I could never imagine separating her from her family as a part of a, ultimatum kind of scheme, as is being portrayed by Miss Southern in this particular situation. Now look, when COVID happened, which by the way was a very strict lockdown in the nation of Australia, as many of you have heard, Lauren talks about how she decided that she was going to move back into work because all the other jobs were shut down and she could earn money in a way from home that her husband couldn't. And he was saying that she should earn money. However, she ended up getting berated for working every time she would do so, even though she was essentially churning over the money that she earned to her husband, just trying to be that trad wife. She also would get berated, apparently, according to her, for not completing tasks that, looking back, she viewed as impossible. But rather than actually stick up for herself, rather than defend herself, she would just pray for grace from her husband, and just pray that maybe if she did enough stuff in order to make him happy, that eventually he'd see the error of her ways and start treating her with kindness, some level of respect, and some level of decency. And honestly, this is very troubling to read. I'm not going to accuse anybody of abuse or anything like that, but this is an abusive pattern. People can see that. That's what's being described to us in this article. Again, put your skepticism out there in the comments if you want. But as somebody who went to school for criminal justice, the idea that you would be beat down, again, with words in this particular case, with actions in this particular case, and then seek out the approval, try to be more perfect in order to avoid that situation again, is a classic abusive cycle. Albeit there is no physical abuse alleged in this particular article as far as I can see. In fact, just to be absolutely certain that as of right now, there's no physical abuse being alleged, I actually keyword searched the word abuse in case I might have overlooked something, and I only found one mention of it, but it's not in the context of Lauren accusing her husband or her ex-husband of doing anything. Now look, I do recommend that you read this article. It is linked in the description of this video in its full context, so you can get a hold of the message and take it from its source yourself, because I do find it interesting, especially for women out there that are trying to live up to this trad life value that is often being portrayed on the internet.com and is in no way, shape, or form connected to reality. First and foremost, a lot of these trad wife influencers are girl boss feminists running their own business. And a lot of these people who are attacking Lauren for supposedly becoming a feminist, for, seeing the error of her ways and then coming out in public and admitting that she made stupid, terrible decisions that a small child, in a lot of cases, could have told her were bad decisions, is somehow a part of her feminist grift, are people who are actually engaging in a feminist grift, selling you this lifestyle. And unlike Lauren, who actually lived up to the values that she believed in, who actually tried to live this out, then regretted it, and still told the truth about it despite backlash, these people are lying, and when they see stories of this not working out, when they see disasters, they ignore that, they hide it, they attack it, rather than affect anything related to the message, because the message is what makes them money, which is why, again, I have infinitely more respect for somebody like Lauren who does these things, even though these decisions, highly questionable from an outsider perspective, let's be perfectly honest, and then admits that she failed, admits that she did wrong, admits that she had a dumb worldview. I mean, again, she had distilled conservative values, in her own words, into listicle format, essentially making her a mirror of those BuzzFeed feminists that we make fun of, and all the listicle articles that they would use in order to say this is how a man should behave in the feminist world. And we also have to understand that while there are religious people who genuinely have a belief in God, who genuinely have a belief in gender roles, who genuinely believe in the biblical method of submission to your husband, as is described by many actually religious people, in reality, this kind of ideology that says that a woman always is at fault for anything that goes wrong in the relationship and always has to defer to the husband is going to attract, at least to a certain degree, bad guys that just want power over women, that want to indoctrinate those women in order to accept their poor behavior. And while there are a great number of traditional guys, religious guys, who actually want to be a husband worthy of marriage, that reality exists, and we just have to acknowledge it. Much in the same way that there's a lot of guys that present themselves as feminists because they're low-key predators, and they want the veneer of sanctity in those circles. Look, I know I opened with a thin comparison to film noir, but in reality, one of the lessons that I learned from filmmaking classes was the following. The best thing you can do is the right thing, and honestly, if you have it right the first time, congratulations, my hat's off to you. But the second best thing you can do is the wrong thing, provided that you learn the lessons from that wrong thing in order to forge a better future. And this is why I respect Lauren Southern, because she messed up. But rather than just ignore her faults, ignore her errors, she's trying to do better going forward. And I think that is respectable. So yeah, I gotta keep it real with you guys out there in the audience about these trends that I find to be incredibly troubling on the right-wing side of the political spectrum. And you can call me simping, and you could say, though, you just want to hook up with this e-girl or that e-girl. But in reality, I would never, and I mean absolutely ever, date a girl that knows how to use a computer. My fiance thinks a cell phone is a magic brick that lights up and makes sounds, and that's why she'll never end up in Lauren Southern's chat room, WhatsApp support thing, Underground Railroad, or whatever you want to call it. Because just like in the way that I'm criticizing all these trad guys and all these feminists for using the veneer of sanctity to abuse women, I'm like a Lifetime movie at home. You know, after the honeymoon, when you get her, that's how it's going down in my household. No, I'm just kidding about that. And yeah, you just get the overall message of the video, though, please. Now, as usual, if you like this video, you can show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on my social medias. Some people are going to take that so seriously. Support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about the story of Lauren Southern, film noir reference. That's where I started. Now I bookended it. Till next time.